So how do you do the style of animation that is growing personal brands on Instagram right now? If you're a video editor or a content creator and you want to learn this style of editing inspired by Dan Coe, then you need to watch this video. I used this style of editing to grow my Instagram account from 10K followers to almost 40K followers in under 1 month, with one video getting over 18 million views. Please make sure that you watch the video in order from beginning to end, as crucial and basic skills are introduced at the beginning, and these skills will build upon each other as the video goes on. So even if you're a beginner at this, you will get some valuable information on motion design by the end of this video. All of these edits will be done on Adobe After Effects, and all the project files will be in the description below for free. And if you want to make your own motion reels just like Dan Coe without having to spend the time learning and creating commonly used graphics from his videos, I have created 40 pre-made ready-to-use motion elements for After Effects. Make sure to click the link in the description if you want to save hours of editing each week. So the first motion reel we're going to create is going to be this iceberg animation. So once you're inside of After Effects, you're going to go to Composition, New Comp, and just make sure that the width and height is formatted to fit IG Reels. So the first thing that I'm going to do is get a PNG image of an iceberg. So this is the one I found online, and this one works perfectly. We're going to go over here to the pen tool. Now I'm just going to trace and make an iceberg. You can zoom in by using your scroll wheel. And if you click on the scroll wheel, you can actually drag your composition around. This looks good enough. And now we can just delete the PNG image. There we go. There's our iceberg. And before we start animating anything, I want to get my compositions ready. So I'm just going to rename this iceberg. Now I'm going to create our water layer. So first we're going to go over here to the rectangle tool. And our fill is going to be blue. Now I will make the shape, and there you go. There's our water. So turn off those proportional grids, and the first effect we're going to add is going to be our wave warp. Let's just mess around with the settings so we can adjust the water a little bit. So we increase the width. I think that looks about good. So now let's turn the waves off over here at the bottom. And we can just do that by going over here, pressing on all edges. So we play that back. There's our water layer. The last thing that I'm going to add is just going to be a couple of clouds. Now, sometimes some of these shapes can get a little bit difficult to create. So what I like to do is just go to a website like Flaticon and finding some icons there that are already pre-made, and you can just download them and add them into your After Effects. All right, so I found a good looking cloud PNG. Here it is. Now it is black, but in order to turn it white, we can just add an invert. So go over here to Effects, add an invert. Okay, there you go. Now if we press S, we can decrease the size of the shape. So now let's go ahead and drag this over here. And now let's actually make another cloud over here towards the left. So what I'm going to do is click on the cloud layer, Control D to duplicate it. Now I'm just going to press P and move the second cloud we duplicated over here towards the left. So we can do that by going over here to position and dragging it around like this. Okay, that looks good. All right, now that we have everything ready, I'm going to hide the water layer. And now I am going to go over here to the text tool, and using the proportional grids, I will go over here and add in our letters, the results. Okay, so let's highlight it, and we go over here on the right side. We can change the font, and we can actually change the fill too. And let's increase the size a little bit. So there you go. Okay, perfect. So now let's duplicate that same text layer by pressing Control D, and let's drag the second layer we duplicated down towards over here. Now highlight this and we can change that text layer. The hard work. Okay, there we go. Drag this a little bit towards the bottom. Okay, perfect. Right before we start to animate everything, let's stylize the iceberg, the clouds, and the water a little bit. Drag the hard work layer and put it right underneath the water. For our iceberg, I'm going to add a glow effect. Now we can just copy and paste the glow effect onto the other layers. So Control C. We're going to copy the glow on the water and the clouds. Now for the water, I'm going to go over here to toggle switches and we're going to change the blending mode to pin light. So for our water, go over here to layer styles and add a gradient overlay. Okay, so now we're going to edit this gradient up a little bit. The bottom half should be dark. Let's make it dark blue. Okay, and then the top should be a lighter color. Lighter blue, that looks good. For our blend mode, change it to pin light. For our iceberg, let's go to layer styles and add in a inner shadow. Okay, right there's a shadow. So let's increase the shadow a little bit, the size. Okay, not too much on that. I think that's good enough blur right here. Now let's copy this inner shadow for our clouds. There we go, our clouds have a little bit of an inner shadow. Now I'm going to add an adjustment layer. And one of the effects that I'm going to add is going to be noise. So let's change the noise to 10%. Let's disable the adjustment layer to hide that for now. So now that everything is stylized, we're ready to start animating. And I'm not going to animate the iceberg. The only thing I'm animating is going to be the clouds, and we're going to add a camera zoom in. So I'll show you guys how to transform all of these single layers into 3D layers. That way you guys can learn how to use the camera tool within After Effects, because camera movements are crucial when it comes to making these types of videos. All right, so first let's animate the clouds, and we're going to set a keyframe at the very beginning of the timeline. We're going to drag this all the way to the end of the timeline, and I want the clouds to move closer to the middle, so I'm just going to move the X value. All right, so let's check. Okay, so that looks good. Our clouds are now animating. So now I'm going to select all of these layers, and I'm going to right click and pre-compose into one single layer. So now let's right click, add new, and let's add a camera. Okay, move the camera over here. If you don't see this, go to toggle and switches. And we're just gonna click on the little 3D box. So now our layers in 3D space. If you go over here to 2 views, and if we change our camera view to the top view, we can now see our camera. And this right here is actually our pre-comp, right? With the camera, we're just gonna simply add a simple zoom out animation. Let's go to the beginning of the timeline. Let's go to transform. So now I'm gonna click a stopwatch on point of interest and position. And I want it to zoom out fully around the 4 seconds and 30 frame mark. All right, so this is where we want it to end. We're going to add more keyframes over here. Now we're going to go to the beginning of the composition, and we're going to drag our Z position. So we actually want the results part to be a little bit more in the middle. So let's go ahead and drag our Y position over here. All right, so if we play this back, our camera starts right in the middle and it zooms out to fully show the iceberg. Okay, so let's move these keyframes a little bit towards the 4-second mark. So the last thing that we're gonna do is add some speed to the position keyframes. So let's go ahead and select all of these keyframes and we're going to right click, keyframe assistant, and easy ease. Okay, so now you're going to go over here and select graph. And these are our keyframes for our camera. So left click and select these keyframes. And we're just going to go ahead and drag the ramp over here like this. So that way the camera moves just a little bit slower at the very beginning, but towards the end, the speed of the camera ramps up and the camera will smooth out right before hitting the second keyframe. For our second motion reel, we're going to recreate this animation right here. First, I'm gonna go over here and turn on my proportional grids. Now we'll go right to the top and click on the ellipse tool. Let's change our fill to white. And while holding the shift key, we are going to make a simple ball. I'll go over here to align and make sure that the ball is centered. If you don't see the align option, go to window and go over here to align. The anchor point is actually off centered. So what we can do to fix that is press Y, go right over here. And while holding control, you're going to double click. Let's scale the ball down just a little bit and turn off the proportional grids. So first, let's set a keyframe. Go over here to position. Then you're going to press Control Shift and the right key arrow. And by doing this, you are skipping 10 keyframes along your timeline. Let's set our second keyframe. Now let's move the ball towards the top. If you press Shift while changing the X or the Y axis, the ball will move faster and drag along easier. Now let's make sure to add some motion blur. So click over here to add some motion blur. As the ball comes down, there's a little blur. We actually want our ball bouncing. So once our ball gets to the bottom over here, hold Control and the right key arrow and skip about 5 keyframes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's drag along the Y position towards the middle. Now skip another 5 keyframes. Drag it towards the bottom again. Skip about 2 keyframes. Drag it over here, right in the center right here. 2 other keyframes, and you're going to set your last keyframe at 1876. All right, so now we have a little bounce after our ball hits the floor. Now to make this a little bit better, we're going to go over here to scale. We're going to press S on our keyboard to bring up the scale properties. So let's set a keyframe at the very beginning. And now to see both the position and the scale keyframes, you're going to press U right on your keyboard. So once it hits the floor, we want it to squish. Go over here and turn this off. So we don't want to squish it too much, just a little bit. About 85 is good. Now you're going to go over here towards the middle. About 5 keyframes is right in the middle. And now just scale up the Y position. It's 85. There you go. So once the ball hits the floor, it goes back up to 77. Once it comes down again, we're going to squish it, but we're going to squish it slightly less. So in between the keyframe 77 and 85, we can put something like 80 just to squish it just a bit. Now it's going to bounce back up, change it back to 77. And at this point, we can just set another keyframe. So now we have this animation. Perfect. So now we need to add those little red arrows that are hitting the ball every time. So first, let's go grab the pen tool and let's make a simple line. So let's turn off the fill, turn on the stroke, and the color won't matter right now. Like we can just put white. Let's change the stroke to 5 pixels maybe. I'm going to start by left clicking, and since our arrow is going to be a little bit jagged, we can make it something like this. There we go. It's going to hit the ball right over here. So there's our first little arrow. Before animating the arrow, go to the ball layer, press enter, and just rename the ball. And actually change the name of this shape layer to 1. Go over here to contents, go to add, and add a trim path. So now we're going to set a couple of keyframes. We are going to set a keyframe on end, and we're going to drag it all the way down to 0. Hold Control Shift, skip about 10 keyframes, and drag the end keyframe all the way down, all the way up to 100 again. So now we can see our line is animated, and let's actually drag it up to 20 keyframes instead. It just seemed a little bit too fast. Maybe 20 or 15 keyframes. 20 keyframes is good. All right, to make it just a little bit more jagged, let's first go to stroke width and set the stroke width to 10 pixels. So after this, we're going to go to add, and we're going to select wiggle paths. So now we can see that the arrow line is a little bit more wiggly, I guess. I don't know how to say it. So let's mess around with the settings and let's drag up the size a bit, and let's bring the detail to about 33. So let's see how that looks. Let's bring it down a little bit. Okay, that looks good. For the arrow, the last thing that we're going to do is add a little point at the end of the arrow. So go to the start tool and we're going to create a simple triangle. So first let's go to fill and let's change the color to red. It doesn't matter because we're going to change this in a little bit, and let's drag down the stroke width down to 0 pixels. So we're going to make a little star. If you press on the arrow keys, you can actually make a triangle just like this. Okay, there, that looks good. And just make sure that this is another shape layer. Make sure that you're not making the shape within shape layer 1. All right, but how do we actually make the triangle follow the line that we just made? There's many ways to do this, but for me, this is the easiest method. So go to the triangle and press P. Now you're going to alt click on position, and now just copy and paste this expression right inside the expression window. In this video, I'm not going to get too much into how expressions work, but if you guys want me to make a video on expressions in the future, just let me know down in the comments. So just make sure that the line is called shape layer 1 and that the triangle is called shape layer 2. All right, so now our triangle is following our line, but it still looks a little bit weird. So let's change the anchor point and let's make it over here. Let's place it right at the end of the line. Okay, that looks good. Cool. Go to our arrowhead layer, right click, transform, and auto orientate, and just click on orient along the path. All right, perfect. So now our arrowhead is following our line we just made. Now we're going to just pre-compose this. Let's name this arrowhead 1. Let's just change the color up a bit. So let's go to layer styles and add a gradient overlay. So let's edit this gradient. Let's make it red, and the end, let's make it orange a little bit. And what I like to do for many of my graphics is change the style to reflected. So there you go. Go to your ball layer and press U again. So the animation starts right over here. Let's press Ctrl Shift and D. This actually splits the layer, and let's go ahead and delete this. So right after it hits our ball, we are going to make the arrow go away. So let's skip about 5 keyframes. Now press T, go to opacity, set a keyframe, and skip about 5 more keyframes. Now our arrow is completely gone. Let's go ahead and drag this. It should start around here right after it's done bouncing. So boom, that's going to be the first hit. Our ball is going to move position a little bit towards the right. It's getting hit from the left. Let's set a keyframe right here. Skip about 10 keyframes by pressing Ctrl Shift and the arrow key. Let's move it a little bit like this. Okay, all right, boom. Now let's add a little curve. So go over here to the position line. I'm just gonna drag this up just a little bit to make a curve. There you go. So I'm getting hit, boom. Now I'm just going to recreate a second arrow that's gonna hit it over here towards the right. Just copy and paste these 2 layers, drag it over here. Now let's edit the line that we made previously. So press G to grab the pen tool, and we can make it something like this. So it can hit it like right here, come over here. Okay, so just drag these points. So yeah, I think this is good. So there you go. Now we have a second arrowhead coming. It's gonna hit it, boom. Let's drag this a little bit further down. So now let's pre-compose the second arrowhead 2, so we can add different effects, and just copy and paste the layer styles that we did on the first arrow. Okay, there you go. So the second arrow is going to hit the ball right from the bottom. Set a keyframe right over here, skip about 10 keyframes, and let's drag the ball. It's going to go up, skip 10 keyframes, and then it's going to go down. Since it hit the floor, we have to make it bounce again. So skip about 5 keyframes, make it bounce up a little bit, another 5 keyframes, and you can just copy and paste this keyframe, and then skip about 2 more keyframes, drag it up just a little bit. Last 2 keyframes, we can just copy and paste them. Okay, perfect. So let's check out the animation. Looks good. And for the second arrow, we're just going to set a keyframe at opacity at 100. I believe we did 5 keyframes, and drag the opacity down. And now we're just going to make one more arrow. So I just finished up the last arrow, and we copied every single thing that we did on the previous arrows. Since it's going to get hit from the top, we have to animate its position again. Let's go right over here to where it gets hit. Let's set a keyframe. So let's skip about 10 keyframes, maybe 15. And we're going to drag this down a little bit to give the illusion that it's falling. Okay, let's go again to 3 seconds maybe, and let's drag it up. Now we skip about 20 keyframes, and we can just center it now. Let's mess around with the keyframes a little bit. For this keyframe, let's drag it a little bit more down. Okay, and then after 30 keyframes, now let's do a second. Let's Let's drag it towards the center again. After this, we're gonna have to make it bounce again. So 10 keyframes, drag it towards the middle, skip another 10 keyframes, copy and paste this keyframe. Now we can skip 5 keyframes. And yeah, I'm just gonna do this until I get that complete bounce effect. Now to make it look like it's really falling, we're going to mess around with the scale again. So press U, so the ball gets hit right here. Once it gets hit, we can press a keyframe on scale. Once it gets to this second keyframe, let's squish the ball a little bit, about 50. I think 50 will be good. Once it gets to this position keyframe, we can set another scale keyframe. Once it's, so I would say somewhere right here, 77. Okay. Now let's squish it again to get that real bounce effect. So then our ball is going to hit the floor. We're going to have to squish it just a little bit more since our ball is going to bounce. Once it's at the top, you can put 77. Okay, squish this just a little bit. At the top, it's going to be 77. Squish just a little bit. 69 is good. At this point, we can just leave it at 77. So this is the animation that we've created. Now let's add some speed lines to make the illusion that the ball is moving. So right click, new, solid. We're going to create a black solid. Go to effects and you're going to type in Turbulent Noise. Go over here to contrast. You're going to set it at 1000. For brightness, minus 100. Go to transform, turn off uniform scaling, set the scale width to 3000 and set the scale height to 105. Let's change the brightness down and change the scale height towards maybe 58ish. And let's bring down the brightness just a little bit more down. To make our speed lines, you are going to hold Alt and left click on offset turbulence. And now you're just going to copy and paste this expression that will be down in the description below. So now that we have some speed lines, let's rotate the solid. Go to your black solid, press R, and let's rotate this minus 90 degrees. So let's scale this up just a little bit. Go to toggle and switches, and we're going to change the blending mode to screen. Let's decrease the brightness, the speed lines just a little bit more. Let's change the contrast just a little bit. So now let's go along our timeline towards the part where the ball starts to fall. And that is exactly right over here. So we'll begin this speed line animation right here. Let's press T to animate the opacity, bring it down to 0, skip about 5 keyframes, and the ball will be falling towards the bottom. And we can stop the speed line animation once it hits the floor. Set another keyframe at opacity right over here. Let's skip about 5 keyframes towards the left, set another keyframe, and on the keyframe on the right, bring it down to 0. Let's add in a little ring animation that scales in and out. Go over here to the top and go to the ellipse tool, put the fill at none, and let's make another little circle. Hold shift to make an even circle. All right, so from the arrow, we're going to copy and paste the layer styles. This is where our animation is going to start. So go to scale, press S on the keyboard, set this keyframe at 0, skip about 7 keyframes, bring it up towards 100, just do about 5 keyframes. The reason why it's scaling out like this and not from the center is because our anchor point is right over here and not at the center. But we can just fix that real quick again by pressing Y, Control, and double clicking over here at the top. All right, that looks good. Now let's add some motion blur onto that layer. Once it gets over here towards this keyframe, we can just animate the opacity, set it at 100, about right here is good, and then turn it down. Let's actually bring the scale up a little bit more. So let me check this out. All right, here are keyframes, and this is how the animation looks like. Scale this up just a little bit more. Boom. Cool. Now we're just gonna copy and paste the same ring animation every time our ball gets hit. And you can duplicate it by pressing Ctrl D. Now just make sure the ball layer is all the way at the top. And right over here at this part, we can see that the arrow is still in frame. And since we want to give the illusion that the ball is moving down, then we have to change the position of that arrow and the little ring. To fix this, we can go to the ring and parent it towards that arrow. So now go over here to the third, and we're going to set keyframes on the position to move it out the screen. So since the ball is getting hit right at this point, let's set a keyframe at this frame, and let's just move this outside of the frame. So there you go. Now to style this up just a little bit, we're going to add another adjustment layer, and we're just going to add that noise effect. Now let's add a glow effect on the ball. Bring up the radius just a little bit and just play around with the settings to see what you like the most. So now let's copy and paste the same glow effect towards our other layers. So everything is stylized and everything has a glow. The last thing that we can do is add some speed ramps. And on your keyboard, press F9. Now click on the graph editor, and the part that I want to mess around with on this graph is this part right where it falls. I feel like we can add some speed to that. Let's select these keyframes right over here, and let's just influence the speed just a little bit. Final part of this is just adding text. So go over here, grab the text tool, and let's add our text in real quick. All right, let's select our text. Let's change the fill to white. So there you go. Now let's add that same glow effect that we did to our ball layer. Just copy and paste that glow effect. There you go. And I like to animate the beginning of the text. So just go to your effects and type in slide down by character and drag it onto your text layer. Go down to text and slide down by character. Go to range selector and just drag the offset keyframe around 8 or 10 keyframes. I think 8 is good. So now we have this little text animation going on in the beginning. And yeah, this is our final result. And for the final motion reel, we're going to recreate this look. So first, let's make those first circles. Using the ellipse tool at the top, we're just going to create 4 circles with a white stroke and a stroke width of 15 pixels. Perfect. So now that we have our first circles ready, we just have to rename all these circles just so we don't get confused. All right, nice. Now we're going to select all of our layers and we're going to Control D and duplicate all these layers. For the layers that we just duplicated, we're just going to go over here to the top and we're going to turn off the fill. And you'll see this white layer. Do this for every single layer that you duplicated. So now let's hide all these layers so we can create our next animation. Select all of your layers and click on the little shy tool. Now all of our layers will be hidden if we go over here and click on this. Now we're going to select our pen tool by pressing G, and we're just going to make a simple line right across the whole entire circles and just make sure it's straight as possible. Now let's animate the line. We're going to go to content, add a trim path. Let's start the end keyframe at 0. Let's scroll all the way to 5 seconds. Let's put it at 100%. And let's actually extend this past the circle. All right, that looks good. Now that our line is animated, let's add that little ball that goes along the line as well. Select your ellipse tool again, and we don't need a stroke on this one. We just need a fill. Just make a little circle. All right, perfect. Now inside this circle, there's going to be text. We're going to select our text tool. We're going to type in U. Let's change the fill to black. Let's set the position a little bit more right here so that it's centered. Let's scale this up just a little bit so the text is bigger. All right, that looks about centered. So now we're going to parent the text with our little ball layer. So in that way, when we animate the ball's position, the text will move along with the ball. Press P on your keyboard and we're going to bring up the position. We're going to alt click and we're going to copy and paste this expression right in the expression window. Make sure the ball is named shape layer 2 and make sure your line is named shape layer 1, exactly like this. Copy and paste the expression. And now we just have to change the anchor point of the ball. So let's move the anchor point over here towards the point right there. So now we can see that our little ball and line is moving across the circle. Now to make those lines break, we're going to right click new and select solid, change the color to white. Now you're going to hide the layer and we're going to make a mask right around over here. So go over here to your pen tool, make sure your white solid is selected and just make a simple mask around like this. The shape really doesn't matter. As long as it's over this white stroke, then you'll be good. Duplicate that layer 3 more times. Select those duplicated layers. You're going to press M and just delete those masks so you can make new mask. We're just going to make these different masks for every single white solid layer. All right, so you should have one mask for every single white solid that you have in your composition. So now that we have our mask ready, let's unhide all of our previous layers. All right, so now let's go ahead and unhide all of those layers that we did previously. So now you're going to go to effects and you're going to add the shatter effect onto one of the outlines of one of your circles. As we can see here, I'm only showing the red circle and the outline layer. Now make sure to add the shadow effect onto the outline layer only. For the shadow effects, you can just copy and paste these settings that I have put up here on the screen. But the most important part of this effect is to go to your gradient, go to your gradient layer, and make sure you choose the white solid that corresponds with your outline. So for example, we had made this white solid previously with this mask right over here. So when we go to our gradient layer, I'm going to choose that exact same white solid and make sure that this setting is at mask. Right before the little ball hits the outline, we're going to set a keyframe on radius, and you can just go ahead and skip one keyframe and then change the setting to 0.4. And if you go ahead and play, we can see that the wall is now breaking right on that mask that we made. Now just copy and paste that shadow effect onto the other circles to make sure that every wall is breaking. And make sure for each circle you're moving the radius keyframes at the beginning where the little ball is about to hit the wall. If you want to find the keyframes real quick, just press U on your layer and you'll be able to find them down here. So let me just go ahead and move this right over here. All right, perfect. Also, if you're not able to see the wall break, you might have to change the position over here. So just make sure the points are right in between the walls. If everything was done correctly, the animation should look like this. All right, so now let's hide these layers and let's go ahead and add the text. The last thing we have to add at the end is the little star with the text that says your goals. So let's go ahead and go to the ellipse tool and select the star tool. Let's change the fill to yellow, and with the up and down arrows, you can just select how many points you want your star tool to have, and there you go, we just made a star. Press shift to keep it straight. So before we move this, let's go to layer, layer styles, and add a gradient overlay. Let's make this part yellow, and let's make this part orange. Let's make this a little bit more yellow, and now just change the style to reflected. That looks good. Now let's scale this down just a little bit, and now let's move it towards the right. Perfect. Now let's add the text at the far end, change the fill to white. Now open up the hidden layers one more time, and we're just going to style this a little bit. So for the green circle, let's add a gradient overlay, and we're going to do that same style that we have been doing throughout this video, which is the reflected style of gradient. Let's also add a glow effect to our circles. Now we can just copy and paste the glow effect onto our other circles, and make sure to copy and paste that same glow effect onto the star layer that we created, and also paste it for the your goals text. All right, so everything looks good. So let's first unhide all of our layers and Control A to select every single one of our layers. Now we're going to right click, pre-compose, and make a new pre-comp. Now make sure you select the little star layer so we can see the outsides of the composition. We cannot turn this pre-comp into a 3-layer because we're using the little star icon, and it only lets us choose either one. But what we can do is go to the beginning of the timeline, turn on the proportional grids, and we're just going to set a keyframe at scale and position. So now we press U, we can see both keyframes, and we're just going to zoom in and just move the circle towards the middle. Let's go all the way to 5 seconds. I believe that's where the animation ends off. So now we have this, but for some reason our walls are looking weird and they're not breaking. But we can just fix this by going to our pre-comp, Control A to select everything, and then just pre-compose this again. And there you go, that's our final result. If you stayed all the way to the end of this video, I want to say thank you so much. And please let me know down in the comments if this video helped you, and let me know what you guys want to see more of.